remarks on all the other rich presentation we've had on debt, but we are zeroing in on the position paper that the ITUC has put together. So we have a powerhouse of presenters who are also going to speak to that paper and its implementation. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists who are going to come up here. And once I have introduced them, I will hand over to them to speak in their order, and then we can engage with the presentations. The first presenter is going to be Dr. Hogg Amyiga, who is the Executive Director of ALRAY and the Chief Economist at ITUC-Africa. So he's the chief author behind that. Please clap hands for Dr. Hogg. So he is going to be our main presenter on the paper, and then there will be other presenters that will also come in. We have Anselmi Amoso, the Deputy Secretary General of ITUC-Africa. He is also going to give us some insights on the reforms being proposed, particularly focusing on the G20 Common Framework. So welcome, Deputy GS, and we will be enriched by your input. We also have Rose Omamo, the Deputy President of ITUC-Africa, a powerful woman, a woman of valor, and she will also give the women dimension and also the aspects of debt versus social spending in the books of accounts. We also have Dr. Kwabena Otto, the Deputy Secretary General of TUC Ghana, who has taken time from his busy schedule to be with us. Please clap hands for Doc. And he is then going to ground the paper into the Ghana experiences and show us how trade unions can respond to the debt issue and also domestic resource mobilization. Then lastly, we have our comrade Asuzu Eche. I think I'll end at Eche. From Nigeria Labour Congress. Another powerhouse who is going to present on the Nigerian dimensions and also speak on the North-South solidarity. So as trade unionists, we know more about being practical and actually grading the way forward without just discussions. So I'm not going to take much of your time, as I've said, because the authors of the reports are here and they have more to say in terms of the workers' perspectives on the debt situation, on sovereign debt in Africa. So Dr. Hogg, I give you the floor. Thank you. Please clap hands.
Thank you very much, Sister Vimbai. Warm greetings to you all. We are here, as already reiterated, to talk about an ITUC-Africa position paper on debt. So this is an organizational view which is titled Towards a Framework for Debt Sustainability and Development in Africa. So you can look at this as the union response to what we think could be a way out, a framework for debt sustainability and development on the continent. We'll try to do this very snappy, right? Because we've been here since yesterday, and we've heard a lot of speakers and contributions on the subject of debt. And so I summarize ITUC-Africa's position paper this way, so we grasp the real essence of what the direction should be. And then we have a discussion after that. It has been said over and over again that the debt crisis is really alarming. In fact, it is a disaster at this point, right? If this was a natural disaster, I'm sure they would have given it a name. That is what it is. It is that bad, because we know that 50% of African countries are at high debt distress, or at least getting pretty much close to it. What that means is that, at least for us, from where we sit, is that there is pressure on government revenue to the extent that it affects social services, it affects expenditure on health, it affects expenditure on education, social services, etc. So then government is forced to choose between creditor repayments and social spending. There is a great human and social impact, which means there are cuts to wages, health, education, social protection. And if we look at just some few cases, for Ghana, where we are in 2022, there was a debt service, a whopping rate of 127% of government revenue being used to service debts. 127% of what government is able to generate goes into debt servicing. So then you ask yourself, what else is left for health, education, and social protection? In Kenya, if you look at it, 45% of tax revenue to debt service was used, leaving 5,000 teaching posts unfunded. That is, again, a realistic example of how debt servicing affects social spending and developmental projects. In 2021 in Zambia paid more to creditors than health, education, water, sanitation combined. How about that? You fund debt to the extent that you do not fund healthcare, education, water, and sanitation to that contributory amount. So that is a crisis. And so when we say the debt cycle is a crisis, these are clear examples of what the crisis looks like. And it's the same situation in most African countries, right? But to deal with this, we also have to understand the structural causes, right? We have a certain Bretton Woods legacy, the IMF, World Bank debt governance that civil society, trade unions are calling for its restructure. That has been a certain bottleneck that have kept us, where we are, the way we have been for a while now, because the debt crisis is such that if you have a debt architecture that does not promote development the way everybody has developed, that does not promote social spending the way social spending should be, then you have that bottleneck giving you that crisis problem because you're unable to develop. There is a rise of commercial creditors, right? Specifically Eurobonds and banks. For the non-technical minds here, and you hear the government talking about Eurobonds, it's nothing special. What is it? Governments call on certain multinational banks like JP Morgan, Citibank, and co. They put together instruments and invite investors to buy into these papers or bonds. They are quicker to get because They do not need creditors to actually, like the IMF would come with austerity measures, etc. So they just go on road shows. They go to London, they go to New York, they go to Frankfurt, stock exchanges and meetings, and then the country is literally sold. So they get bonds, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion loans with really high interest rates because of this, African credit ratings that is quite notorious out there. And then with that, you have, Eurobonds. So a lot of our governments on the continent are going for these bonds, are going for these, credits. And that is becoming increasingly very, very large. So about 43% of Africa's debt portfolio are Eurobonds and commercial credits. And then you also obviously have the COVID-19 shocks, and that is very minimal to the Bretton Woods legacy and the appetite for borrowing, irresponsible borrowing from some of our governments, right? And the lenders are giving the money. They are ready to give the money. They don't really care what the money is going to be used for. And if you have, followed the news, most of these lenders have subsidiary companies that are sometimes tied to some governments, and they use this to siphon money from us. And then, of course, there is a weak global debt relief mechanism to which we have always been calling for a revision of that program. So structurally, from colonial time to the way the continent has been oppressed for a long time, you see that structurally there are problems or legacies that we have been unable to come out of. So that is a real problem, and that feeds into the debt architecture. So we are saying there are flaws in the current architecture. So for example, if you look at the much touted G20 common framework, where you have very slow creditor-driven, non-binding rules for private creditors, Zambia has gone through it, and it takes a very, very long time for any country to get anything meaningful from the G20 common framework, something that is supposed to relieve countries from debt crisis or debt burdens. But it is not working the way it should, and of course, that is a flaw in the system. Another flaw is the debt sustainability analysis, the way creditors ignore social welfare. In fact, that is a major flaw in the way debt is calculated or is based. And that is what the credits agencies, that is what the Bretton Woods institutions use. It is all about efficiency. It is all about the creditors recovering money. It's all about profiteering. So the social welfare parts of debt monitoring and debt servicing is completely neglected. So you find out that is already a flaw to start with, because nobody is borrowing to improve on social services and infrastructure. They are borrowing to what? Repay other loans. So that already is a major flaw you will find highlighted in the position paper. The credit rating agencies are also a big issue. It's a big flaw, right? Because they say there is a certain African risk premium. A certain African risk premium that is pretty high for us, right? And so they bring in funds, make so much money in terms of interests because of that premium, and they leave us with nothing, right? So that credit rating system is also flawed fundamentally. And that is really going against the continent. And there is no global sovereign debt workout mechanism, right? So everything is really ad hoc. And, the IMF, World Bank have released, if you have read it, the playbook, right, on how to restructure, and go through debt restructuring and that is a whole long process and costly process that nobody wants. All right, so there is no sovereign debt workout available to even small countries who cannot afford this kind of debt workout. So this problem matters to trade unions in many ways, right? It matters to civil society also in many ways. Debt affects jobs. It affects pay. It affects services. It is a direct effect, right? There is a paper that you can also find on the ITUC-Africa website that was done just last year on the effects of debt and what trade unions can do. And that paper actually found a direct correlation, a direct effect on jobs. And particularly interesting in that study was that female graduates were worst affected. And that is interesting. And so there is a direct effect on jobs, a direct effect on pay, because immediately these debt restructuring programs come in, IMF programs as they tout them, immediately they come in, then you have austerity in many ways. And what is austerity? There is wage freeze, there is a freeze on employment, and so many other things. So unions, of course, must move from street protests to fiscal governance, and that is what we are trying to do here. But we are not taking the street protest away. It's something that, another level of advocacy we always want to push. We need to push for Debt Transparency Act, obviously, and have seats on debt committees and independent audits. So that is also something we are doing. And obviously, we need to form global alliances with legislators, with civil society, and whatnot. So in this ITUC-Africa paper, we found, if you like, a framework towards a sovereign debt new deal. We are saying we need a new deal, a completely new idea, right? Based on the research we have conducted, we see 4 pillars of this new deal. The first is that debt must be development driven, and it is that easy. It must be development driven. It shouldn't be about financing. It shouldn't be about efficiency. It shouldn't be about profiteering. It shouldn't be about creditors. It is easy. It should be development driven, right? And there should be that transparency, and there should be accountability. If you like, the human dimension, right? What the human rights people are saying, the human right-based approach to development. You need to have that transparency and that accountability. It's the first pillar of this new deal we are talking about. People should be at the center of it. The second is that if we go a bit technical, we need to create an African safety net. Remember, we have a certain perceived high risk premium, African premium, to these loans, right? If you are taking a loan from a bank at 2%, and I take a loan for 16%, look at the difference. In terms of productivity, who will be more productive? Even in normal business, right? 2% and 12%. So it is not fair just because we are in a certain part of the world, we have a certain African premium, which is not true, because if you look at the inflows that come from the global north to Africa, you will be surprised. You will be surprised. And a lot of countries go on the Eurobond roadshows, and they come home with 200% success rates. In other words, if they went for 1 billion, they come home with 2 billion. So there is that appetite to get African bonds, because they have huge interest rates that they will not, these investors, get anywhere else. And that is a problem. So we are saying we should create an African safety net. And in the AU, we are pleased to also know that are also in line with this, as was declared in Lomé in March, in the Lomé Declaration. So we have to have an African monetary fund. Maybe the name, we have to work on it. But the AU also talked about that, an African monetary fund, right? We have the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and we need an African monetary fund. Of course, the AFDB is doing quite a bit on development, but there need to be a bit more done. Most importantly, there should be an African financial stability mechanism, right? That kicks in when countries are distressed. Because you look at it, there are some little African countries in terms of size, in terms of development. We are not all on the same development level. And so you can have this stability mechanism kick in to support countries when they are in debt distress, rather than going to the wolf who will eat you alive. And we know who the wolves are. And then obviously we need an African credit rating agency that would actually take into consideration the African dimension, the social welfare dimension, right? The informality dimension, the women's dimension, our developmental track dimension, our educational literacy dimension, and our diversity, which is usually missed out on all these credit agencies, right? And that is also very, very important. The third one is Africa must speak with one voice in global fora, right? So it is amazing when you go to some of these, international forums, and you find two Africans or two African leaders at different sides of the coin speaking different language. We must speak with one voice, right? And that is why AU's 2025 theme is apt, right? It talks about reparations. And this AFCOR's theme is also around that. We are saying debt cancellation is reparation. We don't owe, and therefore we should not be paying these high interest on these loans. And so Africa must speak one voice, because we are the masses, whether they like it or not. Number 4 is obviously we need to build permanent union and CSO monitoring pillars, right? We can advocate, we can go places, we can talk, but who is monitoring? Who is tracking? Do we have people in the parliaments actually tracking process on? Because tomorrow we are going to rally for debt cancellation. And my colleague, Dr. Kwabena, was telling me on one of their platforms, somebody was asking or trying to be a bit witty by saying, what if they cancel the debts? Our leaders will go back again. Right? They'll go back again for another loan. So who is actually monitoring? We need that pillar. We need to monitor so that they do not go contracting debts, going on road shows, coming back home with money that are not used even for what they are meant for, right? So we look at this as the New Deal, if you find these 4 pillars and as anything useful or something to go by. So coming down to the end, what does the paper recommend, right? Very, very bulleted approaches on how we think from the trade union perspective and from the CSO perspective, what we should be doing. The first, we should make borrowing strictly developmental. What do we mean? We should link loans to infrastructure. We should link loans to health. We should link loans to education. We should link loans to peace building. We should link loans to publish impact audits, right? What the neoclassical school of economics will tell you is that these gains are not measurable. That is the only argument they will tell you. They will say, we need productivity, we need efficiency, we need private organizations to be in business. And that is where the credits should go. We need to finance other debts. And that is what the model has been. But we need a different developmental paradigm. Borrowing for what? For development. And borrowing for development does not mean putting money into complex finance or financial instruments, right? And that must stop. It is simple mathematics. You borrow to invest in infrastructure that will help people. And in the long run, right? In the long run, you get gains. But they do not talk about the long run. It is always that short-sightedness, looking at a short-run effect of having that productivity. And that maximum productivity gain is It's useless in the long run if you don't have a long-term plan. The second is we should adopt an African doctrine on debt. That is paramount, right? So we should exempt these climate resistance and security spending, adjustment thresholds. Let's enforce automatic standstills, right? So let's have a debt mechanism, a debt doctrine, one that kicks in with a certain mechanism to support, institutions or countries that are under the water. We should build, number 3, build continental safety nets, I mentioned, right? Let's have a monetary fund. Let's have a stabilization mechanism. Let's have a credit agency. And that we are happy the AU is really talking about that. We want that to materialize. Let's transform the G20 framework, right? Let's have time-bound negotiations. Countries have been negotiating for 2 years with no relief. By then, the interest they have to pay, remember what happened to Zambia, right? The interest they have to pay surpasses the amount of money they put into education and whatnot combined. It shouldn't be so. Time is of the essence, and therefore the G20 framework, we say is useless. It is a good idea, but needs much work, right? We went to Seville to look at the outcomes, the Compromiso de Sevilla, to see whether we get some really good binding frameworks. But we were disappointed. We need to negotiate a UN sovereign debt workout treaty. And it must be a treaty. Countries should ascribe to it. Countries should ratify it. Countries should stick by it. The global north should own it as something they have as a responsibility to the world, right? This treaty should be permanent and should be rule-based so that they do not take advantage of the resources that we have on the continent. The 6th is that we should table charge domestic resource mobilization, right? Apart from broadening tax bases, we should collect from the wealthy, right? If you read Oxfam's latest report, on wealth tax, the 4 persons, the richest persons on the continent, they owe, if you do the evaluation and the calculation, what they owe, the bottom 50% of the population on the continent do not have access to such resources. How can 4 people on the continent of Africa be richer than 50% of the people on the continent? Is that fair? Is that equity? Right? So we should relook at it and see how, if we are just broadening tax bases, we are not broadening tax bases to touch the working class, but we broaden it such that the wealthy are also paying their fair share, and that can go into. So when we think broadening tax bases, they were saying the informal sector persons are already suffering. They are paying taxes. They are paying monies to municipal assemblies, right? Let's focus on the rich. Let's broaden the tax upward, not horizontally or downwards. Let's cancel these exemptions that we have on the continent. A lot of multinational companies come, we give them tax breaks, tax holidays. Yeah? Look at even the terminology. Tax holiday. For 10 years, 20 years, how would the economy develop with tax holidays, right? We should curb illicit financial flows, right? Remember, the wealthy are working together with their counterparts in the global north, and they know how to hide the money. Let's use an African payment system like the one being developed for AFTA, so that if you send money to a neighboring country like Togo from Ghana, it does not go through New York or Belgium before it gets to Togo. How ridiculous is that? We should have our own infrastructure on the continent so that payment is facilitated. The 7th one talks about innovative financing, the green, the blue climate bonds, but we must do that with care because you need to scale it up. I talked about 8, transparency and oversight, right? let's have, a legislative instrument. Let's push for it so that all loan agreements, are compared with social spending and leisures and must be approved by Parliament. Although it is not, ironclad. We saw what happened in Argentina. Although they have a law that the country's parliament must approve of all loans from the IMF, the country's president still bypassed that provision and went for more loans from IMF. And IMF still gave it, although there is a legislation in Argentina that prohibits that. And that tells you about the irresponsible borrowing that some of these institutions carry out. The ninth one talks about strengthening African global voice, right? Let's push for fair SDR reallocations. And these special drawing rights from the Bretton Woods institutions, for some reason, they have been created to give us a buffer. But when there is a problem, we never get that buffer. So there must be a different way of reallocating. And that, is about the international financial architecture. And lastly, let's build, comrades, a permanent monitoring and advocacy platform where we can establish union-led debt monitoring task force. People who are monitoring our leaders every day, knowing how they are spending the money, where they are spending the money, and who gave them the mandate to spend our money, right? And so that if we go on street rallies like tomorrow to advocate for debt cancellation, our people have trust that our leaders would not go again. So the way forward really, comrades, as I conclude, is that Africa's debt crisis is not only financial. This is an existential problem. It's a human development crisis. And so ITUC-Africa is demanding and calling for debt to become a tool for development, not austerity, not a burden. We require certain bold reforms at the national, at continental, and at global levels. And lastly, the unions, civil society, we must all come together to do that monitoring I keep talking about. I thank you so much.
Well, let's give Dr. Hogg another round of applause. Thank you so much, Doc. I think nobody needs to repeat what he has given us. He has unpacked reports and managed to summarize it in a way that takes us all on board. And also, he concluded by giving us recommendations and a challenge to trade unions to up our game in the fiscus of our economies, and that we need to step up beyond just wage negotiations and conditions of services, and keep an eye, establish debt network committees and integrity committees that are going to partake in this process. So I would like to call upon our next presenter, Anselm Amoso, the Deputy Secretary General of ITUC. The paper highlights the need to reform the G20 Common Framework into a time-bound, fair and binding mechanisms. How can trade unions pressure governments and international bodies to adopt these reforms? And secondly, coalition building is central to the paper's strategy. From your experience, what lessons can we draw from unions, CSOs, coalitions like Stop the Bleeding, to strengthen advocacy on debt justice? I call upon you, sir, to take the podium. You need translation.
Merci beaucoup. J'attends que vous mettiez vos casques. Depuis hier, il n'y avait que moi qui mettais mon casque. C'est votre tour maintenant de souffrir un tout petit peu. Alors merci beaucoup à Dr. Hod qui a planté les décors et qui l'a très bien planté. Et je voudrais appuyer mon intervention sur une question importante que j'ai retenue de son intervention. Il a un moment donné, il a demandé si nous arrivons à réussir à obtenir l'annulation de la dette, est-ce que nos dirigeants ne vont pas repartir à nouveau pour s'endetter? Et je pense que c'est une question importante de mon point de vue, pour la simple raison qu'on a déjà entendu des dirigeants africains, des dirigeants majeurs de l'Afrique, justifier l'endettement actuel de l'Afrique par le simple fait que l'argument consiste simplement à dire le niveau de développement qui est le nôtre, les besoins de développement qui sont ceux de l'Afrique, demandent que l'Afrique s'endette pour pouvoir s'en sortir. Et ils ajoutent que tous les pays sont passés par là, même ceux que nous regardons aujourd'hui comme étant des modèles de développement, sont passés par là à un moment ou à un autre de leur histoire, qu'ils ont dû s'endetter. Ce qu'ils oublient de dire, ça n'est pas le même type d'endettement, ça n'est pas la même qualité d'endettement. Aujourd'hui, nous parlons de dette et nous parlons surtout du fardeau de la dette. On parle justement de fardeau et à juste titre. Je crois que c'est le thème le plus adéquat pour définir ce qui se passe aujourd'hui avec les pays africains. Autre chose qui m'a frappé dans la question de la dette, c'est cette fierté que vous remarquez chez certains dirigeants africains lorsque les fameuses agences de notation présentent leur pays comme étant des pays à moindre risque. Donc, un peu comme ceux qui nous mettent dans cette spirale de la dette sont les mêmes personnes qui donnent les bons points, les mauvais points, et donc qui peuvent vous contraindre à vous endetter de la façon dont eux ils souhaitent. Et je voudrais finir en revenant maintenant à quelque chose qui me paraît essentiel, avant d'aborder la question que vous m'avez posée. Regardez et posons-nous une question simple. Ça fait des années que nous débattons de la question de la dette. Ça fait plusieurs forats, plusieurs ateliers, plusieurs séminaires où nous nous retrouvons pour aborder la question de la dette. Et donc la question est, quels sont les pas que nous avons franchis? Est-ce que la théorie que nous développons, est-ce que cette révolte que nous exprimons est suffisante pour obliger aussi bien nos États que les partenaires de nos États à s'asseoir pour nous donner satisfaction sur les revendications basiques qui sont les nôtres quand nous parlons de la dette? Je pense que c'est non. Et c'est cette question, cette réponse non, qui nous conduit à la question qui a été posée. Quel est le rôle que nous devons donner aux alliances, que nous devons attribuer aux alliances pour espérer que la pression que nous essayons de construire aujourd'hui soit une pression suffisamment efficace pour obtenir ce que nous souhaitons? Je pense qu'en tant que syndicat, nous savons tous, syndicats africains surtout, nous savons tous ce que peut créer l'unité d'action. L'unité d'action aujourd'hui n'est plus seulement au niveau syndical interne. L'unité d'action dont nous parlons, dont nous avons besoin, n'est pas seulement une unité d'action seulement entre les États ou entre les régions. C'est une unité globale. Nous avons besoin de construire des alliances fortes pour que, aussi bien en Afrique que dans les pays de ceux qui sont nos partenaires, cette alliance et cette unité d'action contraignent les décideurs à s'asseoir pour examiner la question de la dette du point de vue des citoyens africains. Parce que c'est une question d'intérêt. Et j'ai parfois le sentiment que nous passons notre temps à pleurnicher et à attendre que les gens nous fassent preuve de bonne foi. Je pense que c'est une illusion. Nous avons besoin d'obtenir par la pression ce que nous souhaitons de bien pour notre nation, surtout en ce qui concerne la question de l'endettement. Donc, aujourd'hui, oui, les alliances ont montré leur effet dans d'autres domaines, à d'autres occasions. Et aujourd'hui, encore une fois, nous avons besoin de créer cette alliance. Mais comment pouvons-nous la créer? Comment pouvons-nous la créer? Dans mon pays, on dit que lorsque vous ajoutez de la faiblesse à de la faiblesse, vous ne pouvez pas obtenir de la force. Qui sont ceux qui doivent créer cette alliance? Comment faire en sorte que les chaînes de l'alliance soient suffisamment fortes et compactes pour créer justement cette barrière dont nous avons besoin? On a besoin d'avoir des organisations de la société civile qui se renforcent à l'interne, qui corrigent leurs faiblesses, qui corrigent leurs lacunes et qui apparaissent comme des éléments importants et forts dans le cadre de cette alliance-là. La question de l'unité d'action au niveau national, mais la question de l'unité d'action au niveau régional, au niveau sous-régional, au niveau international. Cette construction de l'alliance syndicale et des travailleurs donc, va aller vers les autres couches, les autres acteurs qui sont intéressés par la thématique, notamment la société civile, les acteurs étatiques, les ONG et la société civile dans les pays occidentaux pour créer donc cette large alliance dont nous avons besoin. Mais nous ne pouvons pas aller dans une alliance en étant faibles. On ne peut pas aller dans une alliance avec nos guerres habituelles, nos guerres de leadership et notre faiblesse à influencer les politiques publiques dans nos pays. Il est temps que nous comprenions que ceux qui nous dirigent ont besoin d'avoir une veille citoyenne forte dans leur dos pour les pousser. Sinon, nous continuerons donc de chanter tous les ans dans différentes capitales de l'Afrique à faire la théorie, à développer les théories que nous avons entendues depuis plusieurs jours ici. Et nous n'aurons que nos voix pour nos yeux pour pleurer à chaque fois parce que finalement, ce n'est pas nous qui décidons. Et ceux qui décident, parfois, n'ont pas intérêt à ce que nos discours et nos pressions aboutissent. Et pour cela, ils ont besoin juste d'avoir des alliances effectivement fortes. Je voudrais finir mon propos par ce que j'appelle le stress de la dette. Juste l'illustrer. Pour que chacun de nous se rende compte de ce que nos États vivent, ce que nos citoyens vivent. Il y a quelques années, moi, je démarrais, comme agent de l'État à l'intérieur de mon pays. Et j'étais locataire d'un appartement où le bailleur devait passer lui-même chaque mois pour chercher son loyer. Et pendant 3 mois, il a disparu. Pendant 3 mois, donc, il n'est pas venu chercher son argent. Moi, je prenais la précaution de déposer chaque mois la mensualité et donc de l'attendre de façon tout à fait sereine. Ce qui m'est arrivé, c'est que je vivais avec un neveu qui, un jour, est monté sur la fenêtre de la cuisine et malheureusement est tombé dans une marmite qui était au feu. Donc, il s'est brûlé complètement. Et jeune fonctionnaire n'ayant pas d'économie, j'ai pris l'argent du bailleur pour m'occuper de mon neveu. Chers amis, j'ai vécu 3 mois de stress intense parce que lorsque quelqu'un sonnait au portail, mon cœur bondissait dans ma poitrine parce que je pensais que c'était le bailleur et qu'il fallait que je lui explique la situation. Cela m'a conduit, lorsqu'il est revenu finalement, à aller m'endetter chez ceux que nous appelons les usuriers. Et donc, à trimballer cette mésaventure sur plus d'1 an avant de retrouver mon équilibre. Ça, c'est ce que j'appelle le stress de la dette. La dette qui n'est pas structurée, qui n'est pas planifiée, qui n'est pas bien gérée. Et ce stress-là, nos États le vivent. Nos gouvernants le vivent. les citoyens le vivent. Et je dirais, nos gouvernants le font vivre aux citoyens. Mais pourquoi le font-ils? Quel est ce dirigeant d'Afrique aujourd'hui qui n'a pas envie d'être applaudi par son peuple qu'on dise « Ah, il a fini avec la question de l'endettement ». Ça veut dire qu'il y a quelque chose qui les contraint à rester dans ces situations désagréables, inconfortables. Et donc pour cela, ils ont besoin justement que nous fassions corps avec eux, non seulement pour les obliger, mais que nous fassions corps avec eux pour faire face à ceux qui ont intérêt à ce que cette situation-là perdure. Je voudrais conclure mon propos sur cette image et cet appel-là, que nous avons besoin justement des alliances pour, disons, sortir du discours et aller vers les actions concrètes qui nous permettent d'espérer gagner. Je vous remercie.
I think he deserves another round of applause. One, for keeping time, and two, he touched on the humanity aspects, which is normally missed when we analyze our situation. Yes, the figures are important, but the attitude of our leaders is more important. It's the one that speaks to how they behave before borrowing and after borrowing. He highlighted a key important thing: when a leader does not feel a knot in his stomach because he has not yet paid debt, or he has not used the money for what it's meant to be, that's when they can actually be careless. When he highlighted his story, he had actually the hospital bills to show for what he had used the money for. But in a lot of cases, our leaders cannot account for what they will have used the money. And that human element, the task that we have to be able to change the mindset of our leaders as trade unionists, when we get to the table to negotiate these issues, we really need to bring that side of the story. So without much further ado, again, I feel compelled to appreciate this past presentation. I would like to invite Comrade Rose Omamo, the Deputy President of ITUC-Africa. She's going to bring the women dimension. Women workers are disproportionately affected by the impacts of debt and the effects which happen within the economy. So how can debt advocacy be deliberately gender responsive within the sovereign debt New Deal framework? And this paper calls for debt versus social spending. So what role can women leaders and grassroots union structures play in ensuring this transparency drives accountability? Madam. Let's give her a pam-pam as she comes.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the opportunity to also share my view on the same. And let me start by saying that when we were given a presentation on the ITUC position on debt by Dr. Hod, you remember Dr. Hod talked about dimensions, different dimensions. And in regards to that, I will look at the women dimension when it comes to this new deal that he has talked about. Women workers, and if you can remember the sectors that he mentioned, mostly are dominated by women. So you'll find that women workers are at the front line of austerity impacts because they dominate sectors hit hardest by wage freeze, sectors like the health, education, care, informal economy that Dr. Hod mentioned. And I want to start by giving just a very short statistics or data on those sectors versus the percentage of women workers in those sectors. You will find that women make up around 70% of health workforce. More than half of all teachers in sub-Saharan Africa are women. And 80% of domestic and care workers are women. And nearly 90% of informal workers are women, because it is now rated at 89.9%. That is almost 90%. And this is why wage freezes, hiring cuts, and austerity measures disproportionately hit women workers harder than they hit men. And they are holding up the very sectors being sacrificed for debt servicing, if you look at it. So what am I saying? I'm saying that cuts to social protection shift the burden of unpaid care work onto women, deepening inequality that has been talked about since yesterday up to today. So, as Dr. Hod was talking about the debt new deal, sovereign debt new deal, what can we say when it comes to agenda-responsive sovereign debt new deal? It therefore tells us that this new deal must include several issues for women. The first, it must include agenda impact assessments of all debt restructuring and fiscal policies, ensuring women are not disproportionately harmed. Because when we talk about gender impact assessments, we mean very simple. We say before a debt deal or austerity plan is signed, governments must check. Will this hurt more women than men? And if so, then that policy must change. Debt solutions must not deepen inequality. Actually, they must reduce inequality. Secondly, those new deals must rinse social protection spending for services critical to women. And those services would be the health care, the child care, and maternity protection. Because when we say that we are fencing social protection, we mean protecting the people's money. People's money must be protected. It then means that the governments must guarantee that budgets for health, education, pensions, and childcare are untouchable. Even under debt distress, people's rights must come before creditors' profits. And that is when we can say that we are seeing some new dimensions. Thirdly, living wages and equal pay mechanisms as a condition of any debt sustainability framework. Because debt policies must not be allowed to push wages down or widen the gender pay gap, because right now gender pay gap is very wide. So a sovereign debt new deal must guarantee living wages for all workers under equal pay for women and men. That is how then we can say that debt justice becomes real justice. It is never real justice if still men are higher paid than women. The fourth one that I also want to articulate here is representation of women trade union leaders in debt negotiations and monitoring platforms. there is always a saying of nothing for us without us. But I want to say it is nothing about us without us. You don't need to speak for us about us when we are not there. You cannot make decisions about us when we are not there. It is nothing about us without us. A sovereign debt New Deal must guarantee women's participation at every level of decision making. And it must recognize the intersectional realities of women's lives, because if debt justice is not gender justice, it is not justice at all. I mean, women in the rural areas, like young women and those in informal economy, suffer triple discrimination in terms of gender, class, and informality. And a sovereign debt New Deal must prioritize their specific realities, not treat women as a homogeneous group. Yeah? So then, the question of the paper that calls for debt versus social spending ledgers to be published quarterly, for me, it is not just a spending ledging quarterly. It is a tool for democratic accountability, not just a technical exercise. So when ITUC-Africa says that they are calling for debt versus social spending ledgers to be published quarterly, I am saying that they are simply providing a tool for democratic accountability, not just a technical exercise that is what we must do every quarter. So, publishing debt social spending ledgers quarterly, as I have said, will help women leaders and grassroots union structures as they are uniquely positioned to do so many things. And we have a very strong women's committee in ITUC-Africa. And I also believe that in the countries where we come from, in our trade union federations, and even in our trade union structures, which are our mother unions, we have a lot of women leaders and even women committees in those structures. And some of the things that we can do, moderator, as you asked, is that we can translate the data into people's realities. What do I mean when I say that? Showing how debt repayments cut into wages, schools, hostels, and food security. And we can do that by letting people know that data alone does not move people. Stories do. We can do some stories that can move people. Because when you tell me where I am seated and you share with me the data, so what about it? But when you tell stories that can move me, then I will look into it and give it a second thought. So women leaders can take the debt numbers and show what they mean in kitchens, in classrooms, markets, and in clinics. And that way, the ledger is not just a report on paper. It becomes a call to action for workers and communities, because that is where women operate mostly. Another thing that we can do is that we can mobilize communities and shop floor workers to demand that governments prioritize people over creditors. So how can we do this? We can do mobilization that starts where workers live and where they work. That is at the shop floor and at the community, where they live and where they work. On the shop floor, we can show workers that wages freezes are not accidents, they are debt decisions. Then they will know why have their wages freezed, and they will act immediately. They will be interested in following and that in communities we can show families that missing teachers and empty clinics are the cost of debt servicing. When they go to the clinics, they don't get the doctors, they don't get the medication required. When their children go to school, there are no teachers, there are no schools. Then they will start making sure that everybody in the community would know. And as such, you will then realize that women leaders are bridges between the factory and the home, between the unions and the community. When you go at the factories, who is the bridge between the factory and the home? It's a woman. Yeah? And that is our power, to turn depth data into collective action. And we can do that together. Another thing that we will do and we must do is to lead public campaigns that link transparency to lived experiences of women workers. For example, when we have a campaign slogan that says every cedi paid to creditors is a classroom or clinic lost, every cent, every shilling, every cedi, every sefa, that is paid to creditors is a classroom or a clinic lost. So when women lead these campaigns on debt justice, they shift the debate from boardrooms to kitchens to classrooms and clinics. And that is easily understood. And that has real impact, and people, even the community, will start feeling the pain and the heat of debt that their governments owe. And that is how we turn debt from a technical issue into a people's issue and build the power to demand change. Because you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that you created it with. We need a change on a mindset. We need to make sure that we build a power that will demand change. Finally, let me talk about strengthening participatory budgeting processes, ensuring women and grassroots voices shape spending priorities. How can we do this? Sisters and brothers, debt justice is not about reducing what we owe. For me, it is not. It's about democratizing how we spend. If we democratize how we spend, that is what I can call debt justice. So, participatory budgeting puts that power in the hands of the people, especially women who are carrying the heaviest burden of austerity. How can we participate in debates? How can we make sure that we are there to speak about these actions, and make sure that there is transparency and accountability? I normally say transparency without accountability is empty. Because if I am transparent in what I am doing and I am not accountable, like when our governments borrow, we know they have borrowed, but how do we hold them accountable? The transparency of us knowing that they have borrowed. So I believe that women's leadership ensures the ledger becomes a political instrument for justice and not just a report on a shelf. And I do believe that these are key issues that we can do. And finally, to say that there needs to be a monitoring and watchdog role that women must play. And this is forming union committees, women committees that can become permanent monitoring, that can do permanent monitoring of the debt ledgers, ensuring that there are follow-ups, mounting pressure, not one-off publications, and we leave it at there. So that is my thinking, and I believe that with that, then, we can be able to drive the women's dimension in this media.
Thank you so much, Madam. And I say one reason why I'm happy to be a trade unionist is you get to learn new knowledge, you acquire new knowledge every day. And I think as she was speaking, the technical persons in ArchNet, Dr. Hod, were taking down the indicators, the social indicators, the new social indicators that she was bringing up, how we can bring the government to account, so that when we bring the next report, the review of this report should be giving how much we've been able to track and trace government expenditure. And trade unionism moves you beyond talk show, which is what you exactly did. We know the sources of data, we know the structures to work with, and we know how to even verify and validate that data. Thank you so much, Madam. So I will not waste any more time because that was so clear and it has enriched this process. Let me call Dr. Kwabena Otto, the Deputy General Secretary of TUC Ghana. As he is coming, I'll be reading his questions. Ghana's debt distress is a stark example in the position paper. What lessons should unions across Africa take from Ghana's experience in negotiating with creditors while protecting workers' rights? And the paper insists on domestic resource mobilization and curbing illicit financial flows. How can trade unions in Ghana and beyond actively engage in this agenda to expand fiscal space for social spending? Doc, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to also share not my views, but frustrations over Africa's debt problem. And congratulations to the ITUC for that excellent paper. I just want to subject the paper to the whole New Deal, to a question somebody asked me about 4 years ago at a TUC program. And we were discussing Ghana's debt. And the question the person asked a young man was that, why do we borrow? So I tried from an economic perspective to tell the young man that we borrow because we don't have sufficient resources. We want to build new roads, we want to build new schools and hospitals, but we don't have sufficient resources. And at the time, I had data to show that for the 65 years or so that Ghana has been independent, we've run a budget deficit every year. And the deficit means that you need your expenditure exceeds your revenue. And you need additional resources to bridge the gap. And that is the reason we borrow. But then the other people in the room then said that, but we all agree that Africa and Ghana is rich. So why are you telling us that we don't have enough resources if we are rich? And we in trade unions, we keep saying that Africa is a very rich continent. So if we are rich, why don't we have enough money? And that we have to resort to borrowing all the time. Now, part of the reason for this contradiction, a rich continent and a rich country like Ghana borrowing all the time, is because of a number of things. First, things that make us rich are natural resources. But for some strange reasons, we've handed over those natural resources to foreign interests. So a lot of resources is actually taken out of Africa. But those resources are not available to build new roads or build new schools and clinics or hospitals. So if you take, for example, Ghana, and my question actually is about Ghana. In 2024, Ghana produced about 4.8 million ounces of gold, valued at $11.6 billion. In 2025, the projection is that we will produce 5.1 million ounces of gold, and that will be valued at 16 billion. What this means is that for these 2 years, Ghana will produce gold at a value of 27 billion. Remember, Ghana has produced gold officially since 1897. So just check the resources from 1897 to the present date. Then in 2 years, we are making 27 billion. But this is a country that in 2023 had to go for a loan of 3 million from the IMF, had to be described as debt distress, had to default on its debt. When in fact the debt is around the 27 billion we are talking about. The question then is, who gets to have that 27 billion? And the answer is simple. As has happened across Africa, we have placed that 27 billion in the hands of foreign interests. So that resource is not available to Ghana to build new roads. It is taken out of Ghana and out of the continent. So it is the reason why a rich country, a rich continent, doesn't have resources and always run a budget deficit and must resort to borrowing. Now, in the course of the discussion, some additional factors came up, and that is something we must take on as trade unions. Now, we borrow because we don't have resources. There are some other people whose sole business is to lend. There are companies with excess resource, and they have made it their business to lend to countries that want to borrow, and they make profit out of that. How about that one? It is their business to lend. And so we have come to know of predatory lending, for example, because it is just like the woman selling, or maybe the man selling cocoa, I don't know, the non-Ghanaians, a porridge in Ghana. They have to aggressively market the porridge and sell. So the Eurobond lenders do roadshows, aggressive marketing in order to lend, and they make a profit out of that. Now, those people have become so predatory that even when you don't qualify for the loan, they still manage to give you the loan. And they must make profit. I hope you agree with them, or you don't. Their business they have registered is to lend and make profit out of it. Okay. So they will do everything to lend to countries. And there are plenty of examples. When they even don't have to lend, they still lend. I have one example here. In 2015, in fact, in October 2015, 7 months after the IMF and the World Bank assessed Ghana as a high risk of not being able to pay its debts, the same World Bank guaranteed 400 million of payment on a 1 billion bond sold to private speculators under English law with a 10.75 interest rate. Under World Bank rules, it is not meant to provide such guarantees to countries it has assessed at high risk of debt distress. So they have to make their lending. Even though they agree that Ghana cannot repay this, but they still manage to offer the guarantee. The whole point I'm making is that it is their business to lend and to make profit out of it. And when they have lent and the country is in difficulty, they will call for debt restructuring meetings. And in most cases, as in Ghana's case, they will not invite those that want higher wages to the meeting because your country is distressed. And at the point of crisis, our own governments are not interested in sitting with us to talk about the debt because they also know their own deficiencies, what they themselves have done. So, as in most cases, in 2023, 2022, 2023, the unions were not at the table. And we know that we suffered gravely for that. The haircut affected our pensions, in spite of the fact that we fought very hard. And in fact, at some point, we were told that pensions had been excluded from the debt exchange program. But in the end, the pensions were not excluded. Okay. And today, when you sit to government to negotiate, we are now told that our fiscal numbers must not go beyond a certain threshold. And that if you get a wage increase of this percentage, it will push the country to that threshold. And the creditors will back out of the deal they have. So that is the question of what wage freezes that we are compelled to face. Government is not recruiting, even when it has to. When people retire, government is not recruiting. All because of the agreement it has had with the creditors. And they are part of the agreement we have seen. But sometimes I kind of think that we may not have seen all the complete picture in terms of what they have agreed with government. Now, the question of domestic resource mobilization. My personal view is that sometimes the way that subject is discussed, we don't really get anything out of it. So, domestic resource mobilization, you should tax the people more. But about 80% of the people are informal people, struggling on the street of Accra. In fact, if you want more domestic resources in Accra, in Ghana, it is finding ways to retain part of the $27 billion for the 2-year gold production I've just spoken about. It is not about attempt to tax informal economy people. Okay. And I mean, I did my PhD in the informality, on informal economy. Nowhere on the continent have we been able to talk about, have we been successful in taxing the informal economy. The point is that they are not earning enough for you to be able to tax them. But we keep talking about them. The real deal for us is taxing our gold resources, the diamond resources, the oil resources that we have. That is the area in which we have to look at. But more fundamentally, how do we get our government to spend the tax revenues in our interests in a manner that makes it, that profits us and obviate the need for additional borrowing? That is the question we need to ask ourselves. And in answering that question, we need to be interested in the budgetary process in our countries. We need to be interested in how the little we have is spent. We need to be interested in contracts that are given by our politicians. And we need to be able, not on an annual basis, meet with ministers and government people, but on a constant basis, analyze the government expenditure patterns, okay, to be able to shine the light on in areas that are not doing well. So my point is that if you wait for the point of crisis, at that moment, they will talk to people who have money, who have given the money. They will not talk to people who are looking for higher wages. So we must be constantly be vigilant. The second point I want to leave you is that if you want more revenues, please, let's talk about the natural resources. That is where we can get the revenues to invest in roads. It is not about attempt to tax poor people who are already struggling for a living. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, DSG, for that insightful input, and also for the knowledge. And the paradox is, first we go and look for resources because we do not have resources, and then we try to identify the sources of our resources when we have already borrowed. But I hope that this talk also helps us to start thinking what can be done before we dig deep into the debt. And the funny thing that was mentioned in another, one of the side workshops I attended was that you will find that there's a stock exchange for the ivory in the USA, and yet the elephants are in Africa. And then you wonder where the proceeds go. So this is some of the things that need to keep us thinking how we can work smarter in that area. I'm going to call Comrade Eche, Nigeria Labour Congress, and his questions are: Nigeria has a relatively lower debt to GDP ratio, but suffers from a weak revenue base. How should unions in Nigeria frame the debt crisis beyond just fiscal ratios and highlight the social costs to workers? The position paper also stresses North-South solidarity for fair SDR reallocations to curb vulture fund litigation. How can Nigerian unions and civil society push this agenda at both national and global levels? Thank you. Please clap hands for him.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, comrades. Solidarity, solidarity. Thank you very much. You see, Nigeria is also in trouble with debt, sovereign debt. And this discussion comes at a very timely time. We continue to commend the ITUC-Africa for leading this way and making serious emphasis on this very important issue. The question I was asked talks about how trade unions can interface on the seemingly contradiction between the so-called lower debt to GDP ratio that Nigeria has, but then we are seeing a lot of impact of debt, especially the management of sovereign debt, on social services and other areas of our economy. The truth of the matter is that it's actually a contradiction. When we talk about lower debt to GDP ratio, it does not take into cognizance the fact of a very low, abysmally low debt to revenue ratio. It doesn't also take into cognizance the very reality of a very low debt revenue to GDP ratio, which for Nigeria is about the lowest in the world. So these are some of the things they throw up, cosmetics, they throw up to be able to have their way. These are all the sweet candies they add in the banter, to be able to actually perpetrate this kind of injustice against our people. So we should be careful. Because for me, I consider this blind side as very dangerous. And why is it so? Why is it that Nigeria... So the question is, our focus should be on the low debt to revenue ratio, not the low debt to GDP ratio, but debt to revenue ratio. Our focus should be on the low revenue to GDP ratio. And for me, for so many months now, I've been thinking very hard, and I've been discussing this in some clusters, that we are propelling governments in Africa that want to be in government without governance. And that for me is a crisis. It's a huge crisis we have all over Africa. And that crisis is very, very prevalent in Nigeria, where people in government are only interested in being in government for the sake of being in government without offering real solutions to the problems affecting their people. That is governance. And that is where, like I raised in the morning, the issue of political question comes in. Whatever we do with political question will be at the heart of this debt justice campaign. Because people go to government and all they are interested in is to hold the pen that signs the contract. That's all they are interested in. But contract without governance would lead us into deeper spirals of debts. And those are where the issues are. People just want to sign contracts, but they don't want to provide governance. I'll give you an example. In Abuja, where I live, very close to my house, there's a major road. Now, that road has been in darkness since I came to Abuja for so many years, maybe more than 2 decades. Then suddenly, we have who we call a performing minister of the FCT. They call him Mr. Project. Mr. Project comes on board, and he says, I'm going to do a miracle. This road that has not seen light for the past 20 years, I'm going to put light there. And Mr. Project goes ahead and puts light on that road. And everybody is, there, clapping. Oh, wonderful. But that was a contract signed by a government that wants to provide no governance. It's so easy to sign a contract. The bigger duty is in providing governance. They signed a contract. The street lights were provided. Abuja was celebrating. But before the drums stopped beating, all the street lights were gone. That's just a typical case of the situations happening all over Africa. Now, where even the public procurement gets a meager part of the reasons or the rationale for those debts actually implemented, you'll find out that without governance, these things are mismanaged. Even the little development projects they manage to put on ground, they are mismanaged. They are frittered away, and we go back again to borrow to provide the same thing that was provided before. So it's a vicious circle. And that is all attributable to government without governance. In your own country, you can find out ways that your government is operating without governance. And I thought that maybe if the minister of the FCT was just able, in addition to providing or making a contract for the street lights, was able to also put some thinking caps and say, look, for this street light, we need to provide some community surveillance to make sure that these street lights, that they are sustainable. People to watch over these street lights. Security apparatus, to beef security apparatus to ensure that vandals don't lay their hands on this very important public utility. But that never happened. Intelligence was not existing. Where did they sell these street lights to? Who did they sell them to? It's unfortunate that in many of our countries, especially Nigeria, this is where you find public assets being sold in the open market and nobody asks questions. That is failure of governance. And with this kind of attitude, we are still going to go round and round in the debt spiral because we'll keep borrowing to replace what had already been provided for. That's an aspect of it. So when we talk about the debt to GDP ratio, we should be more concerned about governance. Debt to revenue issue. And that goes to the heart of resource mobilization. When governments do not have deep thinking caps. Now, it has gotten so bad in Nigeria that people don't do any hard work in government. People are not interested in doing any real work. When Obama was elected as the president of the United States, I remember the first picture he took in the White House. His hair was jet black, real jet black. But in 2 weeks' time, all of that hair became white. I think that's some governance. That's where people are doing real governance. But in Nigeria, they get in slim and they become more than me. That's a problem. That's a problem. So we need to deal with that. Because those are the roots of our problems. Those are the real roots of the issues. So it's a political thing. We must go back and answer the political questions. Trade unions must answer the political. We say we're not interested in politics. We don't want to be sustained. But they are staining us with all kinds of gutter water by the actions they are taking. And people are suffering. Workers are suffering. We must go back to the drawing board and consider the political questions. We must be interested in politics. We must go back and set up our political commissions to engage the political space and make sure it's a space of real work, hard work, where governments provide real solutions to the people. It's very important. So we need to talk about financial mobilization. We need to mobilize finances, and it takes hard work to mobilize finances. Thinking cap, those who go into government and they are in their offices by 12 midnight thinking of what do we do, how do we get the best solution. Not those who wake up by 12 midnight to hold all kinds of fly-by-the-night political meetings, all aimed at cornering the Commonwealth. Those are not the kind of people that will take us out of the debt conundrum. Then also, for trade unions, like I said, we must be interested in governance. We must be interested in governance. Then also for us as trade unions, we must also, he that comes to equity must come with clean hands. She that comes to equity must come with clean hands. As trade unions, what about our own resource mobilization? Trade unions are now, sinking into the quagmire of borrowing also. We now borrow from banks. And it's coming down. When I joined the NLC so many years ago, one of the first things I heard was that you don't borrow. You're careful about borrowing. They are frown at it. But now, oh God. It's a problem. We are borrowing. But can we do better than that? So many check-off dues are not paid, and trade unions are not setting up mechanisms to make sure that their own funds are collected. We cannot go to government and say that you are not doing enough on finance mobilization. We must do better. We have so much money lying out there. I'm not talking about latent check-off dues that could occur as a result of mobilizing of organizing. I'm talking of those who are already organized, and they are paying check-off dues, but it doesn't go to where it should go to. It's a problem, and we need to do better. Then also, it's important that trade unions should highlight the social cost of insolvent public debt to citizens. Citizens must know that they are paying. It's not enough to say it's a government debt, it's public debt. It's easier to dismiss it that way. Workers must know that one way or the other, we are all paying this money. In fact, we are the ones paying. When our children are being forced out of public schools and being made to go into, how many of us have our children in public schools? I went to a public school, and in my day in the public school, when I was in public school, my principal will say, I don't accept students from private schools because they will come and contaminate my students. That was the standard. All of a sudden, everything changed. Even my own children now, they are also in private schools. And I'm scandalized. I'm really scandalized. So we must also tell citizens that public schools are collapsing is because we are paying. You are paying. It's a price you are paying for allowing your government to be so reckless and so vain with the contracting of foreign loans. Then the second question talks about North-South solidarity for a fairer SDR reallocation. And the need to curb vulture fund litigation. How can Nigerian trade unions push this agenda? For me, I would say, well, what we consider as vulture funds didn't start today. It's been there for so many years, existing as what they call secondary debt market. But now it has become very, very voracious. Some people describe it as the lowest rung of capitalist greed. And they are all swelling all over Africa. We can give examples of what they are doing. In Congo DRC, what they did when they borrowed about $30 million US, and they couldn't pay because of mismanagement. It was meant for a development project, but it never happened. But they were asked to pay. And suddenly, a company from the US swooped in and say, we are buying over the debt. We'll pay the people where you borrowed the money. And they paid. And the money was actually borrowed from the Bosnian government. And they paid. And when they paid the Bosnian government, they took the RC to court. Guess where? Cayman Islands, somewhere in New Jersey. And that was where they took the matter to. They have selection of courts where they go to. And when they went there, they got judgment to pay that DRC will pay the $100 million US. But DRC went on appeal to the British, what they call the British Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. And there the judgment was overturned. But then these guys also went to another court, and the case is still pending. So what are we saying? All over Africa, we are seeing the tendency of people not just killing Africa, but also hovering over the dead carcass of Africa. And that is very, very instructive. So it tells you about the whole depth of the death narrative. It's actually an intentional policy, well constructed, well contrived, to make sure that African economy remains at the lowest rung of global economic development. And therefore, we must be intentional as trade unions to counter this very trend. In Nigeria, we also have that case, what they call the P and ID case, which was actually VR Capitals and then transmogrified into another name. And you know what? They said they had a contract with Nigeria to build a gas company, a gas processing company. But when they looked at their records, the guys had no technical knowledge of even how to build one single metal. One single metal, they didn't have any idea. But here they entered into a contract with some corrupt Nigerian officials. And when, of course, the contract that was designed to fail, when it actually failed, they went to court. They went to Britain, and they got a judgment of 6.6 billion that Nigeria must pay. As we speak right now, that judgment has accumulated to about 11 billion US dollars. And Nigeria went to court and said, look, this is about 7 times the entire budget of our health system. That's what a company, a private company, wants to pounce on, swelling like a vulture, to take advantage of. If you calculate that money, it can build Nigeria a whole brand new primary healthcare system, center in every ward in Nigeria. That money alone can build modern, well-staffed primary healthcare centers in all the parts of all the nooks and crannies of Nigeria. That's what a private company wants to take. So what is actually going on? It's actually instructive to Africa. Africa must wake up. Africa Amuka, Africa Amuka. Because we must wake up to this intentionality, not just to kill Africa, but also make sure that the cadaver is not seen anywhere. That's why the vultures are moving everywhere, to pieces, even the cadaver that is remaining. So we must wake up. Trade unions must be encouraged to do more than we are doing. Thank God we have this report by ITUC-Africa. We must all go back and digest it, and then turn it into actionable plans. Work with the ITUC to ensure that this policy gets to the worker. Our sister, our deputy president, was talking about very important point on the need to transform data to stories. Very important. And for me, I think we need to begin to train our people on the use of infographics. In our unions, we must employ infographics specialists who can work with us on different projects and campaigns that we are running. We should also be able to engage on social media and cause that this matters, that they are turned into a very strong campaign that can actually change the direction in the narrative across our country. And finally, we must build alliances. Trade unions must build alliances. We must insist, from what the paper presented, the paper said that we must insist that there must be fair litigation. Put up a standard. There was a call for a United Nations treaty on sovereign debt issues. We must make sure that such treaty sees the light of day so that we can ensure the survival of our continent for the future of not just ourselves, but also our children and children. Amuka, Africa, Amuka. Thank you very much.
Amandla. Amandla. Amuka, Africa, Amuka. Amuka, Africa, Amuka. Well, you can see now why we saved him for the last. Okay, so because our time has moved, let me invite inputs and questions from our, okay. Right, so I think I'll just go in that order. Is your hand up, sir? Okay, I'll just take 1, 2, 3. There's a hand on the other, yes. So 3 hands on this side, then I'll come back to take 3 hands here. Sorry? There are 2 hands. Wow. Okay. Okay, let's number ourselves. You are 1. Who is 3? Thank you. Okay, and I'll ask you to be brief and to the point. Thanks.
Yes, thanks for these excellent presentations. So I think I have 2-3 questions, maybe clarifications. Because I am working on this informal sector and trade union in India, so particularly on the different issue of labor. So if you go for the my questions to ma'am and also Dr. Hart. So the first question is that most of the cases, if you go for this informal economy, like India, we have 92% are informal workers. So we don't have job security. So day by day, you just imagine the AI also playing a significant role. So machine replacing human beings. So in that context, why most of the informal workers now not joining in this trade union platform? This is the first question. Because ma'am is telling that women participation is very less. So for my understanding is that you have 17 million members, particularly ITUC-Africa, and also you have 107 trade union centers, and you are working in the 52 African countries. So why this initiative that you are talking about, that we as a trade unions not able to take into account of this women participation in that? Particularly I'm talking about rural women, I'm talking about the platform economy, I'm talking about these many dimensions, on that context. This is the first question. The second question is that your suggestion is very excellent, all the points that you told. But when you go for the monitoring, measuring this, particularly the social spending on health or education, so what is your suggestions on that context? What is the mechanism through which we will measure that context? Then another, the third point is that what is your understanding in the role of trade union and the future of work, particularly in this contemporary times here, because of the digital world? So what is your stand on that? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Also, may I just say, may the questions be directed to the topic? There's a whole lot of trade union questions that we can have. But I think to assist our respondents, let's dovetail mostly to the issue of debt and the role of trade unions and workers and how we can impact on fiscals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to our speakers. The first one, in fact, is like a comment. So, Dr. Hayward, you made mention of us creating an African monetary fund, which is very important. But we have an issue in Africa, like the African Development Bank, where we see foreign countries maybe dominating our monetary institution. So I would also like to recommend that while we are creating that African Development Bank, it should be Afrocentric in nature, protecting our African countries, not ensuring that maybe these foreign countries or foreign monetary institutions play a greater role. This will really enhance development. The second one was working in synergy, like an alliances, creating an alliance. We have this issue of, at times, our government betraying the civil societies at the negotiating table. So I will also recommend that it is very important for us to take that into consideration, maybe during maybe preparation before this negotiation. And the last is addressed to our mother. It's not even addressed to her, but it's just to add to what she said. She made mention of including women, which is very important, inclusive participation. But I'm also bringing it from the youth perspective, the youth dimension. We believe we are talking about sustainability in depth, And if talking about that at the negotiating table, youths are not there, it's not really going to be sustainable, because those who will really witness that in future are not part of the negotiating table while we do the advocacy, but we are not at the negotiating table. So it's very important for us to include youths at the negotiating table. Thank you.
Number 3.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Baba Mulifi. I'm from Botswana Council of Churches. I'm a youth participant. I wanted to thank everyone up there, more especially our mother. It is very beautiful to see her mostly talking for women. How long have women been talked for by the other gender that we like very much? Don't get me wrong. But I really appreciate you. I'm a youth, but I had the last speaker, he spoke about education there and there. So I'm a temporary teacher. I've been a temporary teacher for 10 years. For my government, by the way, not in a private sector. So it goes beyond, because now it's because of the debt that we are trying to deal with. It even goes now to being a human rights issue, because they're exploiting me as a learned individual in that field. So I wanted to touch on what she said about including women when it comes to issues, to say we even appreciate, looking at that poster, women are at the forefront. So I just wanted to give a comment to say, in Botswana right now, they are trying, they have introduced free education, free pre-primary education. Every village has like 3 classes. So I think that also the unions can advocate for, in this manner that, looking at just a few here, it supports women when we talk about economic empowerment. I mean, we're talking about social. For a woman to come there's a lot that happens in the morning. Some, they even leave work for raising the small children. So maybe as Africa, if we can also adapt the pre-primary, free pre-primary, because now most countries for pre-primary is in the private sector. You have to pay. So if those women cannot afford to pay for that, some stay home to raise those kids. So I think we should also advocate for that. It's just a comment to say, in Botswana it's happening, so all of us, we can maybe try to advocate for that. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Peli Sankomo. I'm a development economist from South Africa. I also chair the board of Oxfam South Africa. So I want to make 2 points. I think one of the things, I just want to welcome this report, because amongst the key things it demonstrates is that trade unions are taking interest in a lot more intersectional way in macroeconomic management. But my keen interest, and I think it's coming out quite clearly, is with the different recommendations that were presented. Trade unions are deep-pocketed, and they have an opportunity to present a development alternative by using some of their resources to demonstrate how to use your investments, right, to drive development. And some of those monies, well, let alone the fact that most of them are actually managed by fund managers who invest money in capital markets, but in fact, actually, some of that money, you never find it back. And I think one of the key things, I think, ideologically, trade unions find themselves in contradiction, is that all these monies are actually invested but never invested back. I mean, I don't remember a single school that is built by a trade union in Africa, a single university that is built by a trade union in Africa, even on the back of, because trade unions don't only have political power political convening power in as far as being close to government, but also fundamentally, they are quite close, they are quite influential, and they can use their funding to demonstrate that we can actually drive alternative development, but also as well as contribute fundamentally in the issues around job losses.
Okay.
Yes. And I think you hear the point I'm asking is, where is the money going to, where it's being invested? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam. My name is Molly Lamina. I'm from South Africa, and I used to work for the National Union of Mine Workers, which is an affiliate to COSATU, affiliate to Industrial and Building Workers International. I just wanted to raise 2 points, a question and a proposal. And the proposal would be, can the trade union federations in the continent lobby for the Pan-African Parliament to have legislative powers, and legislative powers that can also deal with issues of debt and development. But can we do it such that even at the country level, we have legislation that says legislators, or rather the executive, cannot access external or commit. I'm glad that the comrade from Nigeria, from NLC, raised that issue of they raised some of the issues the way he did, such that they don't make contracts without our permission. I don't know how it can be done. Maybe economists like Pelisa and others can advise us, but that would be my proposal. But then also, in terms of class analysis, do we think we can address all these things within the current economic financial architecture, which is driven by profits over people? And if not, and I think if not, then perhaps as trade unions, we really have to have a parallel struggle that is also about just changing the whole economic political system of the continent towards a socialist system, because simply this system is not assisting us in any way. And lastly, I would like to encourage Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, the trade unions, the powerful federations, NLC, Ghana TUC, COSATU, to be together in strengthening other federations in the continent around these issues, especially this issue of this neo-colonial project of debt burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, Madam, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much. I am Gladys, and few issues. One of them is to support my deputy president to say that women, you cannot go to the table without the women, because the women have to be there to have their own narratives. So I support you, Madam, on that area. The next issue is the interest of budgets, national budgets. How many of us as National Center, when our national budgets have been discussed in Parliament, we are there and it becomes our interest. And I think as trade unions, we should be interested in that area. Dr. Oba, I want to say, my comrade here has made mention about what I already wanted to talk about, and that's the issue of the African monitoring fund. And when we look at the issue of profits against people, do you think it's feasible and people will contribute towards that fund? Because people are looking at profits, and nations are different in terms of what their agendas are, one to another. And you talk about having this fund to help the weaker economic situation of other countries. And lastly is the issue of unity. And I said to some people this morning, when I went to South Africa for the very first time in my life, and I had to present a paper, and somebody said to me, the person introducing said, "This is Gladys from Africa." And I was confused where I was. So I simply took a marker and I went to the flip chart and I managed to scribble the map of Africa. And I showed where Sierra Leone is in Africa, and I showed where South Africa is. So when we talk about unity, do we see ourselves united to work with one campaign? And finally, is the issue of our natural resources. I agree with you, Brother Kwamina, and I went to Brussels, and that is where I saw the biggest diamond in Sierra Leone. I mean, Sierra Leone, I've never seen it. But when I went to Brussels, I had to pay to go to the museum to watch my natural resource in Brussels. So how do we monitor our natural resources? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Mine is not a question, but just to sensitize the speakers on the issues of language. I think that one of the speakers, they spoke about the issues of language, simplifying it. There is nothing free. There's nothing like free education, free what, free what. There's nothing like that. What we are saying is that I'm always simplifying the government like someone who's working at your village, farm worker. Then you tell the farm worker that, can you sell my 2 goats, but with the money that you get from those 2 goats, buy for me 2 pairs of shoes. When those 2 pairs of shoes comes to you, are they free?
No.
No. The government is the people that we put in place to go and look after our resources the same way you are recruiting a person to look after your goats. Now what we are saying is that the money you get from our resources is the one that you should use it to pay our education.
Right.
So we must change that notion to say that there's nothing free. What we are saying is that our resources need our dividend income from our resources. Let that be spent like this. So nothing is free. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Boss, I
just wanted to respond to the sister.
Because when you speak, we
No,
close.
it's just a quick response. She asked political question, just for the guidance. Quick one. Sister, on what we do with, first, we don't have deep pockets. We wish we have. But what we do with, but I understand your question, is about our pension funds and, of course, sovereign fund. And we are also having that discussion amongst ourselves because we have legitimate fears about what our government are doing with this money. And as we all know, the monies are growing every day. And the real fear about what happens is also there. So we have agreed. We want to do a research to bring all our fears on the table and to see if we want to go that route, is it a safe one? We want to be scientific with it. If we get the answer, we are all satisfied, we will advocate for it. That is one. Secondly, also to my other sister, your question about what we are doing to support ourselves, solidarity. And I can assure you, the unions you mentioned and others are already doing what you are saying. Big and strong unions supporting others. We are doing that very well. Komekwa, I have a question for you, a quick one. Taxing our mineral wealth, oil, let's use the example. One of the arguments we hear is that subsidy, we should remove subsidy from oil. And we are saying if it's our wealth, you should make it affordable and available to everybody. And if subsidy is the way so that you keep the price low. And then I use Nigeria for you. A guy came into office, of course, you can also go and check the records. How he came to office is still disputed today. But the first thing he did was to say there is no longer subsidy. And as I speak to you, automatically there was devaluation. And earnings plundered and people are suffering to today. How do you reconcile that? Using oil, there might be others, especially when others talk about removing, decarbonizing. Just to check.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we still have any more questions this side? None. So I'm going to give the presenters to make their responses. Who would like to go first?
Yeah, let me go first. There are questions that have been directed to me, and there are those that are just compliments or addition. So in regards to my brother from India who is asking why informal workers are not joining trade unions, why we are not organizing them, and also asking what we are doing about the rural women, platform economy, and the rest. I want to let him know that indeed, trade unions organize informal sector workers. And specifically in India, where you come from, we have unions like GITU, HMS, that have organized informal sector workers, specifically those in the construction. And so some of them are organized through their associations like what SEWA has done. So it is not true that informal sector workers are not joining the union. They are joining the union. And when it comes to what we are doing with rural women and platform economy, and before I get into that, let me also inform you that even when we are forming or developing international labor standards at the ILC, there is normally a representation of informal sector workers, specifically SEWA and the others. When we were developing a convention supplemented by a recommendation, which is now convention number 191, you will find that there was huge participation, and that is on platform economy, of informal sector workers. So that tells you that there is huge representation that we do. Then when it comes to rural women, you know, these are the people who are adversely affected by so many things like discrimination and what have you. And the union speaks to them because we highlight their issues, not only at a higher platform, but even at the local radio, we highlight their issue. So trade unions are basically, we normally say we advocate for social justice, not only for the employed people, but also for the unemployed. Right now, we have advocated for social protection for informal workers. What are we saying? We are saying the governments must extend coverage to informal sector workers and operators. And that is how trade unions do. In skills development, we do a lot of work for informal sector workers. Look at when you go to these small polytechnics, now trade unions working with national industrial authorities to even develop curriculum for informal sector workers like the mat makers, such like things, because we want them to develop mats that are of standard and that can access market. So we do a lot of work for that. Then to our young brother who talked about inclusive participation for the youths, you are right, and I want to support you 100%. What we are saying is that we need not to leave anybody behind. And when we talk of leaving no one behind, it means that youths, people with disability, all inclusive, should not be left behind. And if anything, even in the campaigns that I was talking about, youth are more swift in developing, tools for campaigns. You are very fast online. Like me today, if I want to Google something here, it will take me time. But when I take it to Dr. Hood, it's in a twinkle of an eye, and it is there. So I just want to support what you have said, that you must also be included in the decision-making processes, and also to sit at the negotiation table. My sister from Botswana, yours was basically recommendations, and no, nothing really to answer. Which one? Yeah, I think those were the ones that were directed to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Who is taking the next?
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que vous devez remettre vos casques pour que je sois sûr que je suis vraiment entendu, s'il vous plaît. Je voudrais insister encore sur ce que nous devons faire au-delà de nos séminaires et de nos forums. Parce que quand vous observez bien les syndicats africains aujourd'hui, nous sommes la plupart du temps dans la réaction et non pas dans l'action construite sur la durée. Les thématiques d'importance comme celle de la dette ne peut pas continuer d'être traitée comme une augmentation du salaire, une revendication d'ordre corporatiste. On a besoin de se renforcer, on a besoin d'avoir des argumentaires solides, on a besoin, d'apparaître aux yeux de ceux qui nous dirigent comme des interlocuteurs capables d'apporter la répartie quand il s'agit donc de discuter des questions techniques importantes. D'où la construction d'une forme de syndicalisme qui va au-delà de ce qu'on nous a appris traditionnellement, qui s'adapte au monde d'aujourd'hui et qui doit faire de la recherche, avoir des éléments solides pour pouvoir discuter d'égal à égal avec ceux que nous avons besoin de convaincre. C'est très, très important de mon point de vue. Quand vous revenez dans nos pays aujourd'hui, combien de syndicalistes au niveau national sont en mesure de faire la lecture d'un projet de budget? Combien de syndicalistes sont en mesure d'aborder des thématiques actuelles, importantes du monde du travail, comme la dette, comme le climat, comme les ODD, comme la question des mines, etc. Combien sont en mesure de le faire? Ils ne sont pas nombreux. Nous avons besoin de construire une ressource humaine capable de se mettre au niveau des débats qui sont des débats importants aujourd'hui. Et quand on a fini de faire ça, on ne le dira jamais assez, c'est que nous devons avoir, un discours qui est un discours de construction. Parce que nous passons beaucoup de temps à parler, sur la thématique de la dette, à parler de ce que nous attendons de nos dirigeants, de leurs faiblesses vis-à-vis des pays développés, de leur attitude, qui n'est pas une attitude d'engagement et de patriotisme vis-à-vis, des pays développés, mais en même temps, je pense que notre discours gagnerait à regarder un peu qu'est-ce que nous pouvons leur apporter. Et ce que nous pouvons leur apporter, c'est déjà le combat pour construire avec eux cette souveraineté dont nous avons besoin, dont ils ont besoin quand ils sont assis à la table de négociation. Et ça passe par quoi? Ça passe par ce que j'appelle le devoir citoyen basique, la mobilisation des ressources au niveau national. Qu'est-ce que nous faisons pour sensibiliser les citoyens pour qu'ils comprennent que s'ils ne veulent plus que nos pays continuent de s'endetter comme ils le font aujourd'hui, ils ont besoin de faire un effort pour payer leurs impôts, que nous-mêmes, en tant que citoyens, nous développions le réflexe de payer spontanément nos impôts fonciers, nos impôts salariaux, nos impôts, etc., etc. On a besoin d'avoir ce type de discours pour que nos dirigeants comprennent que le syndicat peut être un interlocuteur qui accompagne la bonne gouvernance et non pas un interlocuteur qui ne fait que les critiquer. Et enfin, nous appeler un peu à faire cette introspection qui nous demande de nous interroger vraiment sur ce que nous valons en tant que force sociale. Et je ne prendrai que le petit exemple de la libre circulation des personnes à travers nos frontières. Les tests existent, tous les tests existent, mais pour traverser la frontière et venir à Accra, moi, béninois, je dois subir plein de tracasseries et si je ne veux pas me faire mettre en retard, je suis obligé de payer. Et donc d'accepter de faire cet acte de corruption. Donc sur la simple question banale de la libre circulation des personnes, nous n'avons pas encore réussi. Et la dette, je crois que c'est un autre niveau de combat qui demande de notre part, disons, un changement de comportement, un changement de paradigme quand nous parlons du combat syndical et du combat pour, disons, les citoyens de nos pays. Je vous remercie.
Merci.
Okay. Very important questions. And I also want to address the question of language. So in fact, when I hear the African Monetary Fund, I become alarmed that all those of us sitting here, the way we have lambasted IMF, only for us also to recommend something.
Same.
Even the wording, and I'm glad the speaker himself said we can talk about the wording. And this ties in with the assertion that can we really resolve all our challenges within the current economic structures? Because what we seek to do in Africa is more or less to domesticate the structures that haven't worked for us. So we actually need to do some more thinking. Because the question is not one of simply replicating those structures and thinking that we can control them. Sometimes, so what the West has seen is to simply sometimes say that let an African head one of the institutions. And we begin to applaud them if Kofi Annan is the head of the UN. And somehow we get a Nigerian to be the WTO chair. Then we think that, okay, we are also making it. But really, they put them there as figureheads. There's a South African book by Patrick Bond. The book is titled Talk Left and Walk Right, in which he analyzes the situation well, where we get an African to head the institution, but really he serves not our interests, and he has no real power to do that. So we need to examine some of the nomenclature we use in our own report. True, there may be nothing free in the world, so they take our taxes and pay for our school fees. But they also sometimes take our taxes and buy cars for themselves, fueled from, that's free for them. Or it's still not free.
Well said there.
Yeah, so there might be something free for a minority of our population. The subsidies question, we have fought it very hard in Ghana, but at least today we know that there's no subsidies on oil in Ghana. We have fully, into a free market when it comes to oil pricing. Now, the question about taking control of our resources can be separated from the subsidy question. So how come Nigeria, having drilled oil since 1956 and having generated nearly $1 trillion from oil, how come Nigeria's situation is what it is? So when I talk about taking hold, is to, for example, go the Saudi Arabian way. So many analysts will say that Nigerian economy is not diversified. It only depends on oil. The same is true for Saudi Arabia. But they've taken hold of their oil, said that they are able to provide education, health, and in some cases, freebies for their citizens. This is what we have not been able to do in Africa, and if you take Nigeria. Now, in the absence of that, the Nigerian citizens then demand subsidies. But really, the fundamental issue is how you take control of the oil resources. Use those resources to provide quality public service, education, health, and generate incomes elsewhere. Said that if incomes are high, people are paid well, they really will not struggle too much about what? Subsidies. So the real question in my view is also to change the model of contract. In fact, in researching for this panel, I looked at the first mining lease that Ghana under colonial rule granted in 1897. And then I look at Ghana's current fiscal regime for mining. The wording is almost the same. Nothing has changed since 1897. And I asked myself, what has happened? Meanwhile, what has changed is that in this 128 years, we have had very excellent Ghanaians speaking nice English, but they only copied what the colonial masters gave in 1897. And it was almost the same and pasted it somewhere and call it Ghana's new fiscal regime. We need to take hold of our resources. That is the resource we have. Chasing after people selling in the street, trying to impose VAT on them, is just red herrings. It's not addressing the real challenge Africans face. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for the questions and the comments. For me, I would want to say that it's important for responding to the issue of political governance, that African countries, government must be put to the task by trade unions, who should do a little extra by also setting up political parties of their own. We have all over the world examples of labor movements, labor unions that have actually aspired and got into power and have been able to implement some of the things they are talking about. The NLC, you know, we have a labor party in Nigeria, which was set up by the NLC. So it's a success story. And at the last election, it was an open discussion that they actually won the election. So there are possibilities which we can actually do if we dare. Then the other issue is that we should also use political spaces. We have fiscal management boards where these issues are discussed. In Nigeria, we have what they call Fiscal Responsibility Commission. And we have a presence on that commission. But unfortunately, the government has refused to inaugurate the commission for about 6 years. And we are fighting. You know, so when they see that you're able to fight and win one, they stop you in another dimension. So our approach must be holistic. We must keep fighting to ensure that these spaces are used. Because, take for instance, the FRC in Nigeria is actually where they set the medium-term expenditure framework, which actually is the very foundation for budgets, at least for 3 years. And these are the places where very key sensitive debt management decisions are taken. So trade unions must occupy those spaces. And then finally, when we talk about the issue of what more can the unions do in terms of raising this issue and bringing it to the front burner. I've been in discussions, actually in programs, even by ITUC, where these issues are raised. And people say no, that is we should call it not a global south issue. We should call it a global workers issue. I say no, we have a peculiar concern. You can imagine when we are talking about who is actually owing who. The whole transaction that went on in the more than 400 years of slave trade, when they computed it, somebody like Nathan Nunn did a lot of work on that, and he came up with the estimate that what Africa is owed just on slave trade alone is about 131 trillion. And when you combine it with what was taken away from us through colonization, he says it comes to about 777 trillion. Do you know the size of the world global budget? The size of the global budget is about 100 trillion. You can imagine, Africa has actually consumed the whole global budget. What they owe us, if they pay us, we will consume the global economy by 7 times. 7 times. So who is owing who? So these are the compelling reasons why trade unions must take this matter very, very serious. And then, of course, those who say they are on the issue of the vultures that are swelling in the cloud. The issue is about they are owing more than us. US owes about 37 trillion. Now that is about the whole size of the debt owed by both Africa, Asia, Europe, and some change to remain. Yes, and that's about 40% of the global economy. And yet they are the ones telling us that we must pay. Pay who? They are also owing badly more than us. So in advancing our conversation, please, it's important we know where we are. We know our rights. We should talk as a matter of, this is about rights. It's about rights demand. It's about historical justice being done to our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for listening and for your participation in this debate that intends to shift workers' participation in the fiscal agenda of Africa and setting the workers' agenda and making the workers a priority. So in trying to shift that, we have been analyzing the report, and I'm going to call the chief economist to conclude and wind up all the discussions that have taken place. So shall we give him a pam-pam and also an appreciation for all this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I look at the comrades seated here. It's some few minutes to 7, and it's been the same people who have been here. Nobody has left. A round of applause to you.
Yes.
Yeah, it means this matter is really dire, and we are all so much involved in it. There was a question sent to me online. And so I want to appreciate technology here by starting with that question. It's about Rwanda's financing of debt and the approach to look inward, right? Internal bonds and commercial banks in Rwanda. It was a question online. And yes, this is part of what we are calling the New Deal. If you are taking loans in foreign currencies, right, like the USD and the euros that you do not control, obviously when there are fluctuations, it affects your economy and affects it very badly. We don't issue our loans, the debt, in local currencies. So you see, in fact, the highest GDP to debt ratios are not in Africa. If you check the statistics, Japan has a GDP to debt ratio, over the roof, over 200%. America also same, over 100%. But then when it comes to us, when we have, in Nigeria's case, is it about 38%? In Ghana's case, about maybe 65 or 70 now. And then people are alarmed. Hey, you have a high debt to GDP ratio. You cannot finance, projects, right? How is Japan, having such a high, ratio, but creditors still lend to Japan? Everybody owes, right? So why is ours unsustainable? Because of that so-called African premium, right? Because then it is about who is lending, why they are lending, and what is the so-called trust system that is in the global architecture. And that is where the problem is. So yes, we should look inward, but it does not mean we should borrow uncontrollably. Like I mentioned, what is the debt being used for? Are you using to finance other debts? Are you actually, I was going to use the word stealing. Are you actually, using the money for something else that is free for you? Yeah. Let us look at those models, and that is what is really, really important. And so I found this online question very, very interesting. We need those issues, and the curbing illicit financial flows are very important. The question about the, organizing informal sector, ITUC-Africa actually declared this year as a year for organizing. And there is a plan of action on recruiting persons from all sectors, including or especially persons from the informal sector. I mentioned Rwanda earlier. Rwanda's national center, the main national center, has the majority of its unions from the informal sector. And so there is work being done. Yes, there is a gap there, like the General Secretary mentioned. We're working on it, and very soon we should have the informal sector, hopefully, as being the largest in the union. I think that would be a good thing. The question about the African Monetary Fund, the name, like I mentioned, but the reason why monetary is important, and somebody mentioned the AFDB, I also did. AFDB is a development financing bank. So, the way they are structured and the way they are wired and the way they actually, look for investors is a bit different they don't have their own autonomy. They have investors investing, and in some regard, some critique that institution as also being a bit neoclassical in a way it operates to an extent, right? It is doing its best, but it hasn't got resources on its own. It's a development bank, infrastructure-wise, etc. But you also need, we have been talking about a finance mechanism, right? This is the economics of things. You need to make sure you have a bank that is able to come in to really help in the solvency issues, right? You need a bank that can come in to, like the IMF, we may not like it and we don't like it, but it was there to stabilize, the world economy. So what we are saying is, what African Union is saying, we need a bank in Africa that can stabilize African economies. That can, stabilize in terms of the, the monetary and the financial aspects of our economies when we so need it. But perhaps we should change the name from monetary. We just call it an African bank, perhaps. Maybe that should be the proposal. But we do need such a bank to give us some stability when we do need it. There was a question about, I found that question interesting, about the African Parliament and giving it that legislative power. But the way the Parliament is set up now is such that countries contribute about 5 parliamentarians. It is only an advisory, body, especially to the AU. Its powers are very limited. But I agree with you. There must be further lobbying and consultations. These are sovereign states. We are struggling with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Ratification and the harmonization of certain protocols. We are struggling with the Africa Free Movement Protocol. A few countries have ratified, but it looks like you are very futuristic. You are taking us 100 years into the future, but we will get there. And it is an aspiration. It is an aspiration we need so that countries are binded by law. Those treaties that we talk about, so that it can help the situation. I'll end with the General Secretary's worry about subsidies. And like Dr. Kwabena mentioned, in Ghana, Ghana followed the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions to remove subsidies. So the fuel prices in the country is like a seesaw. Today it is $1. Tomorrow it's $1.50. You wake up another day, it's like, oh, fuel prices come down. I mean, fuel prices for many, especially in a country like Ghana and like in most economies, is a social wage. It is the way the society works. It's a social protection architecture for the poor. And so if you remove such subsidies, it means you are removing a certain kind of wage from the people, right? And so what progressive economies have done and progressed through industrialization is to do this gradually while giving a buffer to the bottom, 50%, right? So that people who are at the very bottom still have the support. They still actually do so in developed economies, where the elderly have, that pass where they can travel on state buses for nothing, right? And they subsidize those state transport systems to carry the elderly around. So why do they still have it in the global north, but tell us to remove the subsidies without buffers? Where does this social wage go, right? And it does not cushion people. And remember, if you look at social protection systems, they are terrible on the continent. Look at Liberia. It has only 7% of Liberians have pension, social pensions. 7% out of the entire country have pensions. So they live on family structures, right? What I call family taxation. The richest in the family is the one that gets taxed. And then you ask the question, why are African entrepreneurs not doing better than their global north compatriots? Because they have 50, 20, 80 people they are looking after. And that family taxation is how the society is structured, because government is not taking responsibility, because the government officials are driving the V8s that are not plying the roads of the global north. We must wake up. We must have a certain, developmental structure, and we must live on that. And to conclude, I mean, Nigeria imports 38% in terms of its total exports on refined fuel. Refined fuel, right? The country is digging up crude, but the oil you find in the country, about close to 70%, or recently Dangote is coming in, 80% of the refined fuel is imported. How can you develop on such an economic structure? So yes, we know there are developmental challenges, but the global north must leave us alone to develop the way they also developed. Thank you.
So thank you all very much. And I think my parting words with you all colleagues is that we can read the report extensively on our website, and also make any inputs. They are welcome. I would also want to encourage us to always be futuristic and think long term, even as trade unionists. Also, the big danger from our economies and economic managers is that we are always dealing with crises, but we don't plan like 50 years in advance. And yet our protagonists always plan 100 years. When America is in a crisis, it's because the reservoirs that should last 100 years will have gone down by 5%. Then it's a big crisis. But with us, it's because the oil tanks are empty. Then we say we have a crisis. I think if we start planning in long term, and I could see the recommendations we're trying from the report, we're trying to shift us to look beyond the now, the situations now, and actually look to the future and see how we can prepare and establish buffers for our economies. So I would like to thank our panelists. I think they have been upfront and forthcoming in expectations well beyond what we actually looked to receive today. You have done marvelous work. I think if I lived in Ghana, I would be taking you out to dinner. But unfortunately, fortunately, Ghana is my mother. So I can hide behind that. And because Ghana gave Zimbabwe our first mother as a nation, and we are always told Ghana will provide for us. So, and you have been a wonderful audience. Let's clap hands for you. And thank you all, and see you at the march tomorrow. Tomorrow we are marching. Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Well done.